Hey guys, welcome to Jitters, and today we are going to deep dive into some terrifying true stories from Reddit, which will make your skin crawl and leave you questioning the shadows in your own home. Trust me, you are going to love that. Now, without further ado, let's jump into some terrifying true Reddit stories. My horrifying experience when I broke into a home. Hillcrest Lane is a quiet place, the kind of suburban street where every house looks the same, big lawns, two-car garages, lights off by 10 p.m. You'd think a place like this would have advanced security cameras or alarms, but that's the thing about people in neighborhoods like this. They don't expect trouble. They assume danger stays far away in these parts of town. Lucky for guys like me, they're wrong. I was standing in the shadows just outside the side gate of a house that I'd been watching for a couple of weeks. It belonged to a guy in his early 40s, lived alone, and worked a boring 9-to-5 job. Every night, he came home, parked his car in the driveway, and disappeared inside until morning. No guests, no family, just him. I waited just to be sure, glancing at my phone. 11:42 p.m. The lights had been off for over an hour. Perfect. The gate creaked softly as I pushed it open, slipping into the backyard. I'd chosen this house for a reason. No dog, had an alarm system that I could easily defuse, and a sliding glass door with a lock I could easily pick. Put on my gloves and started working on the door, and within 2 minutes, I was in. Inside, the house was dark and still. My eyes adjusted quickly as I took in the layout. Living room to the left, kitchen straight ahead, a staircase leading to the second floor. My heart raced, but it was the familiar thrill of the job, the rush of knowing I was in someone else's space, with their belongings at my fingertips. I made my way through the living room, careful to step lightly, no need to rush. I'd start upstairs, go through the bedroom, grab anything valuable, then be on my way out, easy peasy. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, something caught my attention. A door, half open, at the end of the hall. The smell hit me first. It was not rotten or bad, but smelled more like a strong disinfectant, like bleach or formaldehyde. I couldn't tell for sure, and it made me want to know more. I flicked on my flashlight and shone it down the narrow staircase. I realized it was a basement, but something was off, way off. I descended the stairs slowly, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the walls. At the bottom, the basement opened up into a larger room, but this wasn't the kind of basement people use for storage or laundry. The floor was smooth, polished concrete, the walls lined with thick, soundproofing foam. A large metal table sat in the middle, surrounded by strange tools. Scalpels, pliers, some other instruments I didn't recognize. And on the shelves lining the walls, glass jars. Dozens and dozens of them, neatly arranged, each one holding something small and twisted. I stepped closer, holding my breath, as my flashlight revealed their contents. Locks of hair tied into little knots, floating in some kind of liquid, and not just hair. Other things too. Fingernails, teeth, eyeballs. I stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest. My hand knocked into something on the table, sending it clattering to the floor. It was a book. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling as I flipped it open. It was an album. The first photo was of a woman, mid-20s, smiling into the camera. The next page showed her again, but this time, her smile was gone. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, and her hands were bound behind her back. The third photo, she was dead. The life drained from her face, her skin pale, her mouth frozen in a final silent scream. And the same thing, repeated over and over, with each time the victim being a different person. I slammed the album shut, bile rising in my throat. At that moment, I realized of all the houses I had at my disposal, I picked one that belonged to a serial killer. And then I heard something that made the hair at the back of my neck stand on end, a soft whimper, faint but unmistakable. I turned, sweeping the room with my flashlight, and froze. In the far corner, strapped to a metal chair, was a woman. Her wrists and ankles were bound, and duct tape gagged her mouth. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto mine. She was alive. I rushed to her, ripping the tape from her mouth. She gasped, trembling, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Please, help me," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "He's coming back?" Ice filled my veins. I fumbled with the ropes binding her, my hands shaking so badly that they kept slipping. Her eyes darted toward the stairs, terror creeping into me, spreading like wildfire. We had seconds. Maybe. Then we heard it. Not footsteps, but the quiet hum of a nearby TV screen flickering on. It showed grainy footage from cameras inside the house, each room, each window. One by one, we watched as the windows sealed themselves, thick metal slabs sliding into place with a heavy finality. Doors slammed shut and locked, as if triggered by some automated system. Everything was locking down, as if a failsafe had been activated. We were trapped. Planet clawed at my throat. I spun around, my flashlight flickering just as the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs. "No, no, no," I whispered, backing away. Then he appeared. The man who clicked those dreadful photos. The homeowner. He stood at the foot of the stairs, calm as death, with a look of twisted amusement. His eyes flicked between me and the woman, as if deciding who to kill first. In his hand, he held a long, gleaming knife. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and almost disappointed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. If I had any chance of escape, I'd have to get past him first. And even then, the whole place was sealed shut. He started down the stairs, slow, savoring every moment. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a metal rod, and held it in front of me, desperate. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. "Stay back," I shouted, but my voice wavered, unconvincing. He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that sent chills down my spine. "You don't understand," he said, voice calm, almost playful. "This is my home. You're the intruder." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I swung the rod with everything I had, but he was too fast. His knife slashed across my arm, sending a searing jolt of pain through me. Blood poured from the wound, staining the floor, and I fought to stay on my feet as dizziness washed over me. At that moment, I realized I wasn't getting out of here alive. Not in this basement, not against him. He lunged again, knocking the rod from my hands. It clattered uselessly to the floor as I fell back, crashing hard. The air rushed out of my lungs as he pinned me down with his foot, pressing against my chest. The knife glinted in the dim light, raised slowly, aimed at my throat. This was it. Time slowed as I braced for the end, watching the blade descend. But then she appeared out of nowhere. The woman I'd freed, bloodied and trembling, but alive. She swung the rod I'd dropped with all her strength, a raw, primal scream ripping from her throat as the heavy metal connected with the back of the killer's skull. The crack echoed through the basement. His body crumpled on top of me, unconscious, his knife clattering to the floor. I shoved him off, gasping for air, my chest heaving. Together, we bound him to the metal chair, making sure he couldn't move. His head lolled to the side, blood dripping from the gash in his skull. He was out cold. But we didn't take any chances. The house was still locked down, but the woman, her name was Sarah, knew how to disable the security system. She'd been watching him, learning. Within minutes, the doors clicked open. We didn't waste a second. We ran through the basement, up into the house, and out into the night. Cold air finally hit my face like a slap, and for the first time since stepping into that nightmare, I felt like I could breathe again. My arm throbbed, but I didn't care. We reached the street, and Sarah, with trembling hands, started calling the cops with the phone she had retrieved from the killer's pocket while tying him up. I simply collapsed onto the curb, staring up at the night sky, rain falling in soft droplets. I was alive. I had come so close. Too close. But I made it. As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, I closed my eyes, whispering a silent thank you to God, and quietly slipped out of there before the cops arrived. I'd been reckless, greedy. I'd walked into the wrong place thinking it would be easy, but I survived. After that night, I never developed the urge to rob again. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. She's been saying the most horrible things recently. I'm infatuated with her, utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone, waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her, don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting, almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself, almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make-or-break era of a blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start to slowly drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed, how she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened, how she'd twirl her hair and her finger when she was excited. All of it, her smell, her smile, her eyes. Yeah, I know, it probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I'd think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates, to that first kiss as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. All right, fine, I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet. I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together. No matter how late she was over, once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger, just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it, but after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long, drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep, she shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somniloquy. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanor seemed to say, that's it? No, Stephen. Listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breath heavy, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house. But she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disoriented if that happens. And don't respond to me, just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave to the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered she was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled. But then I noticed the shadowy outline of her, sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out, I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard, it was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. "I'll chew the skin from your bones," she said. I froze. At first, I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed, just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted, something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again, in the same voice as before. "If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning." That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something. From the bedroom, I listened, and then I heard it again. "Stephen!" It was that same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first, but then it continued. "Stephen?" Still, I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you?" I still didn't say anything. I was told not to. But I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard her once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans," she began laughing. "The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city, then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking, it was something much more. Something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into the bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice, still that same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself, more so, I believe, than the typical falling in love story. No, I feared that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me, of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur and she would be free of it. I know I should leave, that I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. I found a priest's diary from 1910. The contents of it haunt me to this day. I've been working for a cleaning company for a couple of years now, and you see some weird stuff, but nothing compares to what happened at the old Fisher house. The memory of that day still crawls under my skin, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever shake the feeling that something is watching me, um, something dark. It started like any other job. Mrs. Fisher had passed away a few weeks ago, and her family wanted the place cleaned up so they could sell it. The house was big, a dusty old thing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. It was one of those places that immediately felt wrong the moment you stepped in. The air was stale, thick with the smell of rot and neglect. Every step I took on the creaky wooden floors echoed through the empty rooms, the only other sound being the wind outside rattling the broken windows. I started in the living room, wiping down furniture and sweeping the floor, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. It was in one of the upstairs bedrooms where I found it, a small, leather-bound diary tucked under a loose floorboard. The diary looked ancient, the pages yellowed and brittle, the leather cracked from age. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some old family keepsake. But when I opened it, something changed in the air around me. The first page was written in shaky, old-fashioned handwriting, dated July 12th, 1910. It was signed by a priest named Father Augustine. His words were strange, like he was documenting something terrible that had happened. El mino patrius et filii et spiritus sancti. I write this to recount the horrors that befell the village of St. Cuthbert, for my soul will never rest until the truth is known. I kept reading, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. It began with the children. Their laughter twisted into screams, and their eyes turned black as night. One by one, they fell to the curse, speaking in tongues, writhing like serpents upon the ground. At first, we thought it was a sickness, but it was not of this world. It was the work of the devil himself. The room suddenly felt colder, and I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the house was empty. I was alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to keep reading. I was called to the village when the first child died. Her body twisted in unnatural ways, her mouth open in a silent scream. The villagers whispered of demons, of something unholy that had come to our land. I did not believe them. I was a man of God. I was a fool. The first exorcism failed. Deus in adiotorium meum intende. The words of the ritual did nothing. The child laughed, a laugh that was not her own. She spoke to me in the voice of 1,000 serpents, mocking God, mocking my faith. And then she died, her body turning cold and stiff in my arms. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a creeping sense of dread that was getting harder to ignore. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. I opened the diary again, flipping through the pages. The priest's handwriting grew more frantic as the entries went on. His Latin prayers scattered throughout the text, as if he were desperately trying to cling to his faith. I have seen the face of evil. It wears the skin of the innocent, but its soul is black. The demon is no longer in one body. It moves through the village like a plague, corrupting, consuming. I tried to perform another exorcism tonight. It went wrong. So very wrong. Daemons me circumdederant. The demon was stronger than I could have imagined. It spoke my name. It knew me. It taunted me, saying it had been waiting for me. I could feel its presence in the room, crawling beneath my skin, filling the air with its stench. Suddenly, I heard a soft creak behind me. I jumped, the diary slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, but the room was still empty. The shadows seemed to shift, though, moving in ways that didn't feel right. It was like something was here, with me. I picked up the diary again, my hands shaking. I wanted to stop reading, but something was pulling me in, like the words had a power of their own. I flipped to the last entry, dated October 31st, 1910. The village is lost. The demon has claimed them all. Men, women, children. It moves through them like a plague, leaving only death and madness in its wake. I hear its voice in my sleep now. It whispers to me, calls to me. I know what I must do. This is no longer a battle of faith. This is survival. I will confront it tonight. Fiat voluntas tua. If these are my last words, let it be known that I fought, though I fear I fight in vain. The last line was written in shaky, barely legible script. I hear it now. It is coming for me. As soon as I finished reading, the wind outside picked up, howling against the windows. The house groaned, the floorboards creaking as if something heavy was moving through the halls. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the whispers started. They were soft at first, like the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, but they grew louder, more insistent. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a language that made my skin crawl, the same language that Father Augustine had written in. Demo, de moent, ad te venunt. The room seemed to darken, the shadows stretching across the walls, twisting and writhing like something alive. My heart pounded in my chest, and I backed toward the door, clutching the diary like it was my only lifeline. But then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood. It was tall, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes black and empty. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and malevolent. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the thing in the corner. Then it smiled. The smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face in half, revealing rows of sharp, blackened teeth. And then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp that seemed to echo inside my head. Fiat voluntas tua. I bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run before, down the stairs, through the darkened halls, out the front door. I didn't stop until I was in my car, slamming the door behind me and fumbling for the keys. The house loomed in the rearview mirror as I sped away, its dark windows staring after me like eyes. I never went back to the Fisher house. I quit my job the next day, moved to a new town, tried to forget everything I'd read in that diary. But I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. The whispers still come at night, creeping into the edges of my dreams, filling my mind with dark, ancient words I don't understand. And right now, as I'm writing this, I feel like I'm being watched, like there's something standing in the corner of the room smiling. I hear it now. It is coming for me. We visited a house that belonged to a serial killer. We were just a stupid group of friends, Tom, Ezekiel, Sarah, and me, Ethan, always getting ourselves into trouble in our little town on the outskirts of Serbia. It was freezing most of the time, the kind of cold that made your breath hang in the air, but we didn't care. We were young and dumb, ignoring the warnings of kidnappings from our school, convinced it could never happen to us. One day as we walked home, Tom, with his usual reckless grin, suggested we check out an old abandoned house at the edge of town. The place was infamous. It had once been home to a man who was discovered to be a serial killer. The guy had been dead for years, but the rumors about him still spread like wildfire. I didn't want to go. Something about it felt wrong. But dares started, and I caved, like I always did. The house was worse than I imagined. The windows were boarded up, but inside, it looked like the remnants of a forgotten past. Old, broken furniture, faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. There was something eerie about how untouched it seemed. Each room carried an unsettling silence, like the house had been waiting for us. It didn't take long for us to get bored, though. That's when Tom suggested we check out the basement. My stomach twisted, but I followed them. The stairs creaked beneath our feet as we descended into the pitch-black basement. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing strange things. Books scattered on the floor, and markings that looked like remnants of some black magic rituals. I remember thinking that maybe the stories were true, that the killer wasn't just a murderer, but something worse. We debated what to do next when, suddenly, Tom collapsed. One moment he was standing, the next he hit the floor like a sack of bricks. I barely had time to react before Ezekiel fell too. Sarah let out a rasping cough, collapsing next, her eyes wide with fear. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't move. My vision blurred, and I was the last to hit the ground. When I finally woke up, there was a light, harsh and flickering, shining down on me. My body ached, and when I tried to move, I realized my wrists were chained. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the others, Tom, Ezekiel, and Sarah, chained beside me. We were all awake now, disoriented and terrified. "I'm so hungry," Tom whimpered. Ezekiel groaned in agreement. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice shaking. No one answered. Instead, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. The basement door swung open and down came a figure. My blood ran cold. It was him, the man who was supposed to be dead, the serial killer. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken and lifeless, but he was very much alive. "Good morning, children." His voice was a gravelly whisper that sent chills through me. Tom screamed, "You're supposed to be dead." "You're not real," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. The old man just smiled, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Death fears me. The devil is my servant." What followed was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. He spoke of his rituals, the sacrifices, the murders he'd committed in the name of something darker than death itself. His words were graphic, horrific, a sick confession of years of torment and bloodshed. When I begged for him to let us go, he just smiled again. "You must be hungry," he said, tossing a knife onto the floor in front of us. "Feed yourselves." With that, he left, locking the door behind him with a sharp, ominous click. Days passed, maybe weeks. The hunger gnawed at us like a beast inside. There was a window in the basement, but it was boarded shut, and though our chains weren't connected to anything, we couldn't escape the room. Ezekiel was the first to break. He collapsed, gasping for breath, and within minutes, he was dead. We were starving. Tom looked at Ezekiel's lifeless body and suggested something I'll never forget. "We have to survive," he said, holding the knife. "We have to eat." I screamed at him, horrified, but he didn't listen. He carved into Ezekiel's flesh and started drinking his blood, the metallic scent filling the room. Sarah and I retched, vomiting in the corner, but eventually we couldn't fight it anymore. Tom offered us pieces of Ezekiel, and though I swore I wouldn't, I did. I don't know how long we lasted like that. Days blended into weeks. The room was a mess of blood and rot. One day I woke to find Tom unconscious and Sarah unchained. She stood up, her eyes vacant, and told me she was going to find help. She made it halfway up the stairs when an unseen force, threw her back down. Her neck snapped with a sickening crack. I screamed for Tom, but he didn't wake up. I was alone now, hungry, terrified, losing my mind. It must have been months since we disappeared. I didn't want to die, but the hunger was unbearable. I picked up the bloody knife and dug into my friends. I didn't want to, but I had to survive. The old man returned, watching with sick satisfaction. "You've done well," he said. "Now you're ready." But I wasn't. Not for him. I stabbed him as he turned, plunging the knife into his back, and ran. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the stairs. When I grabbed the door handle, I expected it to be locked, but it wasn't. It opened easily. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. We were never trapped. The door was never locked. We could have left at any time. We were too blind, too scared, too stupid to try. I ran faster than I ever had, all the way home. When I finally found my parents, they didn't believe me. No one did. They told me that I had been missing for 5 years. 5 years of my life gone, and the police found nothing when they searched the house. Now I'm here in a psychiatric hospital writing this down. No one believes me, but I know the truth. He's still out there. It's only a matter of time before he finds me again.